What if the most sacred place in your town hid the darkest secret? Imagine a place where prayers once echoed through stone corridors, where the innocent sought refuge, and where, beneath the surface, something unspeakable festered for generations. Now, picture this: a construction crew, breaking ground for a new row of suburban homes on the edge of Lake Michigan, stumbles upon a rusted metal box, wedged deep in the earth, where the roots of old pines twist like grasping fingers. The box is small, battered, and sealed with a lock so corroded it crumbles at the touch. Inside, a folded piece of linen, stained and brittle with age, wraps a rosary, its beads worn smooth by desperate hands. Beneath it, a list of names, written in a careful, looping script: Agnes O'Connor, Bernadette Walsh, Teresa Donovan, 23 in all. At the bottom, a single line, almost an afterthought: Remember us. The local historical society is called in, and the whispers begin. Some say it's just a relic from the old convent that once stood here, a place long since demolished and forgotten. But others, those who grew up with stories of women in black habits, watching from the woods, of cries in the night that the wind could never quite explain, no better. The box is more than a curiosity. It's a message from the past, a plea that refuses to be silenced. Most have never heard this story. Fewer still know how deep the horror goes. The church records are sealed, the land redeveloped, the official histories sanitized. But the truth, like the box, refuses to stay buried. Tonight, we open the lid on a mystery that has haunted the Wisconsin countryside for over a century and a half, a story of faith and betrayal, of innocence lost and evil cloaked in piety. If you think you know the secrets of St. Mary's, think again. The real story begins here, in the cold earth, with a name whispered in the 1850s. Wisconsin was a land of contradictions, a wild, untamed frontier where the promise of new beginnings clashed with the weight of old fears. The forests pressed close, dense and ancient, their shadows swallowing the narrow roads that wound through the countryside. Settlers from Germany and Scandinavia carved out farms from the wilderness, their Lutheran and Methodist churches rising modestly above the fields, symbols of hard-won community and faith. Yet, for all their piety, there was an undercurrent of suspicion, a wariness of outsiders and the unknown. It was into this landscape that the Catholic Church sent its emissaries, determined to plant a flag in the heart of Protestant territory. St. Mary's Convent rose from the earth like a fortress, its limestone walls quarried from the very land it sought to tame. The building was a relic of ambition, a former lumber baron's mansion, repurposed and expanded, its three wings forming a cross that seemed to challenge the heavens. Gothic arches loomed over narrow windows, their glass catching the morning sun in shards of red and blue. The bell tower, tall and severe, cast a long shadow across the fields, its tolling a daily reminder that something new and perhaps unwelcome had come to stay. The convent's grounds were a study in contrasts. Neat rows of vegetables and herbs bordered the wild tangle of the surrounding woods. A small chapel, its spire visible for miles, stood apart from the main building, a beacon for the faithful and a warning to the wary. The nuns who arrived that autumn were strangers in every sense, Irish accents thick on their tongues, black habits stark against the gold of the dying grass. They moved through the village in pairs, heads bowed, eyes averted, their presence both a comfort and a provocation. To the Catholic newcomers, St. Mary's was a sanctuary, a place where orphans and widows might find shelter, where the sick could be tended with compassion and skill. The nuns brought with them a sense of order, a rhythm of prayer and work that shaped each day from the first toll of matins to the final hush of Compline. Their charity was real, their faith unshakable. Children who had lost everything found warmth and food within those walls. The dying were eased into the next world with gentle hands and whispered prayers. But to the Protestant locals, The convent was a riddle wrapped in ritual and secrecy. The Catholic hierarchy, with its incense and Latin chants, its strict rules and hidden spaces, felt alien, almost threatening. Rumors spread quickly in the taverns and church halls. Some whispered that the nuns practiced strange rites by moonlight, that their prayers could summon storms or blight the crops. Others, remembering old persecutions in Europe, saw the convent as a beachhead for papal power, a threat to the hard-won freedoms of the frontier. On the day of the convent's consecration, a crowd gathered at the gates, some curious, some hostile, all wary. Bishop William Quarter, resplendent in his vestments, spoke of mercy and mission, of bringing God's light to the wilderness. His words echoed through the chapel, but outside, the mood was less forgiving. "Papists," muttered one farmer, his voice thick with old resentments. "They'll bring their foreign ways here, mark my words." Another nodded, eyes fixed on the procession of black-robed figures. "My family fled the old country to escape the church. Now it follows us even here." Yet for all the suspicion, there was a grudging respect. When Sister Margaret cured a child's fever with her herbal remedies, even the most skeptical neighbors took notice. When the orphanage opened its doors to the children of dead laborers, the community's icy reserve began to thaw, if only a little. Still, the convent remained apart, its walls both shelter and barrier. The nuns kept to themselves, their laughter rare, their sorrows hidden. The woods pressed close, and at night, the wind carried strange sounds chanting, perhaps, or something else. In this place of faith and fear, of hope and suspicion, St. Mary's stood as both promise and warning. It was a sanctuary for the vulnerable, a fortress against the unknown. And though no one yet suspected a stage upon which the darkest of human dramas would soon unfold, the seeds of tragedy had been sown, watered by isolation and mistrust, waiting only for the right moment to take root. They arrived in the autumn, 23 women in black habits, their faces pale from the long journey and the weight of what they'd left behind. Each carried her own story, her own secret hopes and silent fears, woven together by the vow that bound them to St. Mary's and to each other. In the convent's first weeks, before the shadows lengthened and the air grew heavy with dread, the sisters clung to the rituals of their faith and the fragile comfort of shared purpose. Mother Superior Catherine Murphy was the axis around which the community turned. At 42, she was a woman of formidable presence tall, with sharp features and eyes the color of winter sky. Her reputation preceded her, a leader forged in the fires of Boston's slums, where she had nursed the dying and buried the forgotten. Her voice, when she spoke, was both balm and blade. In her private diary, she wrote, "God has called me to this wilderness, to shape these young souls as iron is shaped by fire. I must be strong, for their sake and for my own." Sister Elizabeth Foster, the orphan mistress, was her opposite in every way, soft-spoken, round-cheeked, with a smile that seemed to promise safety. She had grown up in the care of nuns herself, and her letters home to her aging aunt in New York were filled with gentle optimism. "The children are shy, but they warm to me with time," she wrote in November. "I see myself in their eyes, lost and searching. I pray I can give them what I once received, a sense of belonging, a place to call home." Sister Margaret Clark, the infirmarian, was a study in contrasts, tall and thin, her hands deft and cool, her gaze unwavering. She had apprenticed with a physician in Boston before taking her vows, and her knowledge of both herbal and modern remedies was the envy of local doctors. Yet there was a reserve to her, a distance that even the other nuns could not bridge. In the margins of her medical journal, she scribbled notes not just on fevers and wounds, but on the souls of those around her. "Pain reveals character," she wrote. "Some break, some harden, some become something else entirely." Among the younger sisters, hope and uncertainty mingled in equal measure. Sister Agnes O'Connor, just 23, wrote long letters home to her family in County Cork, her careful penmanship betraying the tremor of homesickness. "The work is harder than I imagined," she confessed in December. "My hands are raw from scrubbing, and the cold seeps into my bones. But Mother Catherine says our suffering is a gift to God." I try to believe her. Sometimes, at night, I dream of green hills and my mother's voice, and I wake with tears on my pillow. Sister Bernadette Walsh, with her clear singing voice and quick wit, became the heart of the dormitory. She led the others in whispered prayers after lights out, her laughter a rare and precious thing. Yet even she felt the weight of the place. In a letter never sent, found years later among her few possessions, she wrote, "There is a loneliness here that no prayer can touch. We are together, but each of us is alone in our longing. I wonder if God hears us so far from home." Sister Teresa Donovan, strong from years of farm work, was the first to question the severity of the penances imposed by Mother Catherine. She confided in Sister Mary Collins, her closest friend, during a stolen moment in the garden. "It's not right, Mary. We came here to serve, not to suffer for every small mistake. Sometimes I think the walls are closing in." Mary, ever cautious, urged her to patience. "We must trust in God's plan. Perhaps the hardships are a test." The bonds between the sisters were forged in these quiet moments over shared chores, whispered confessions, and the rare comfort of a kind word. Yet beneath the surface, cracks began to form. The older nuns watched the younger ones with a mixture of pride and anxiety, knowing how easily hope could curdle into despair. The younger sisters, for all their faith, felt the chill of isolation, the sense that something unseen pressed in from the woods and the stone walls alike. In the refectory, as candlelight flickered over tired faces, the sisters shared stories of home, of Irish villages and Boston streets, of lost parents and childhood dreams. They spoke of the future, of the lives they might have led, and the sacrifices they had made. "We are brides of Christ," Mother Catherine reminded them, her voice echoing in the silence. "Our suffering is not in vain. We are the light in this wilderness." But even as they clung to hope, a shadow crept through the convent. The punishments grew harsher, the silences longer. Letters home went unanswered, or returned with strange, formal replies. The sisters began to watch each other, to wonder who might be next to draw the Mother Superior's ire. In the darkness before dawn, as the bells called them to prayer, some whispered not to God, but to each other. "Are you afraid?" "Yes, but we must endure." They did not know it yet, but the bonds they forged in hope and sacrifice would soon be tested in ways none could imagine. The darkness was coming, and only together could they hope to survive it. The first winter at St. Mary's was bitter, the wind off Lake Michigan slicing through the convent's thick stone walls. The sisters huddled together for warmth, their breath clouding in the icy air as they knelt for matins before dawn. At first, the hardships seemed a test of faith and expected trial for those who had chosen a life of sacrifice. But as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, something in the air began to shift. The rhythm of prayer and work, once a comfort, became a cage. Mother Catherine's discipline, always strict, hardened into something sharper. Where once she corrected with a stern word or a guiding hand, now she imposed penances that bordered on cruelty. A misplaced word during prayers might earn a day of silence. A broken dish, a night spent kneeling on the chapel's freezing flagstones. The younger nuns, already homesick and exhausted, learned to move quietly, to keep their eyes down and their thoughts to themselves. Sister Josephine Brady, whose hands trembled from the cold, was caught humming a hymn as she scrubbed the refectory floor. For this, she was ordered to kneel on dried peas for the length of the rosary, her knees swelling and bleeding beneath her habit. Sister Mary Collins, watching from the doorway, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She tried to help Josephine to her feet afterward, but Mother Catherine's gaze pinned her in place. "Discipline is the cornerstone of devotion," the Mother Superior intoned, her voice echoing in the silent hall. "Remember that, all of you." The sisters began to speak less, even among themselves. Laughter, once a balm against the loneliness, faded from the dormitory. Meals were eaten in silence, eyes fixed on bowls of thin soup and crusts of bread. The recreation hour, meant for rest and fellowship, became a tense, watchful affair. The older nuns kept to their routines, but the younger ones, Agnes, Bernadette, Teresa, grew pale and withdrawn, their faces pinched with worry. Rumors began to swirl, whispered in the darkness after lights out. Some said they had seen Mother Catherine moving through the halls at night, her footsteps silent, her shadow long and thin against the candlelit walls. Others claimed to hear strange sounds from the north wing, muffled cries, the scrape of furniture, the low murmur of voices in a language none could place. Sister Margaret, the infirmarian, was often seen carrying bottles of laudanum and other medicines, her face unreadable. When asked, she would only say, "Some wounds are best treated in silence." It was Sister Agnes who first voiced what others only dared to think. One evening, as she and Sister Bernadette prepared for bed, Agnes whispered, "Do you ever feel like we're being watched? Not just by Mother Catherine, but by something else?" Bernadette squeezed her hand, offering what comfort she could. "We must trust in God," she replied, though her own voice trembled. "He sees all, even in the darkness." Then in April, the first absence. Sister Agnes failed to appear for morning prayers. Her place in the chapel stood empty, the line of black habits broken. The sisters exchanged anxious glances as Mother Catherine entered, her expression unreadable. At breakfast, she announced, "Sister Agnes has been called to assist at our mission in Minnesota." Her departure was sudden, as such callings often are. "We shall pray for her success." The explanation was delivered with finality, brooking no questions. But the sisters could not help but notice that Agnes's few possessions, her prayer book, her rosary, the extra woolen stockings she cherished, were gone, as if she had indeed packed and left. Yet her cloak still hung on its peg, and no one had seen her say goodbye. Sister Bernadette, her closest friend, was silent and pale, her eyes red from weeping. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the convent grew heavier. The sisters moved like shadows, careful not to draw attention. The punishments continued, each more severe than the last. Sister Claire O'Donnell, caught with a piece of chocolate sent by her family, was forced to fast for 3 days, taking only water and a single crust of bread. When she fainted during prayers, Sister Margaret revived her with smelling salts, her lips curving in a strange, satisfied smile. The rumors grew darker. Some whispered that the missing were not sent away at all, but hidden somewhere within the convent's labyrinthine halls. Others spoke of secret visitors, well-dressed men who arrived after dark, their carriages waiting in the shadows beyond the gates. The nuns began to fear the sound of footsteps in the night, the creak of floorboards outside their doors. Sister Mary Collins, ever cautious, tried to reassure the others. "We must not let fear rule us," she whispered to Sister Teresa as they worked in the garden. But even she could not ignore the growing sense of dread. Letters sent to Agnes's supposed new mission in Minnesota went unanswered or returned with brief, impersonal replies. The handwriting, when compared, seemed oddly familiar, too neat, too practiced. One night, as the wind howled outside and the convent's walls seemed to close in, Sister Bernadette confided in Mary. "I don't believe she left," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think something happened to her. I think we're all in danger." Mary squeezed her hand, but could offer no comfort. The truth was, she felt it too, the sense that the walls themselves were watching, that the darkness in the halls was not just the absence of light, but the presence of something far more sinister. The next morning, another place stood empty at prayers. Sister Bernadette was gone, her bed neatly made, her few belongings vanished. Mother Catherine's explanation was the same: a sudden transfer, a call to serve elsewhere. The sisters bowed their heads, but inside, fear bloomed like a bruise. What happened to Sister Agnes? The question hung in the air, unspoken but ever present, a shadow in the halls that no prayer could banish. And as the days passed, the sisters began to wonder who would be next. Spring returned to Wisconsin, but inside St. Mary's, the thaw never came. The world outside saw only the surface, a convent of tireless women, their habits fluttering like crows' wings as they moved between chapel, garden, and orphanage. The bells still tolled for prayers, the orphans still sang their hymns, and the sick still found comfort in Sister Margaret's remedies. To the villagers, the nuns were models of charity and discipline, their lives a testament to faith in a harsh land. But within those limestone walls, a different story was unfolding, a story of vanishing faces, desperate whispers, and a fear that grew with every empty bed. It began with Sister Agnes, then Sister Bernadette. Each time, the explanation was the same: a sudden transfer, a call to serve in some distant mission, a need so urgent that there was no time for farewells. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Always the youngest, the gentlest, the ones who still clung to hope. Their departures were announced at breakfast, their names spoken with forced pride and a warning finality. "We must not question God's will," Mother Catherine would say, her pale eyes sweeping the silent room. "Our sisters serve where they are needed most." But the sisters left behind could not help but question. They watched as the numbers dwindled. 23 became 20, then 18, then 15. Each absence left a hole, a silence that deepened with every passing day. The dormitory, once filled with the soft sounds of breathing and whispered prayers, grew quieter, the beds spaced farther apart. The sisters learned to avoid drawing attention, to keep their heads down and their voices low. Even the smallest infraction, a dropped plate, a misplaced word, could bring punishment or, worse, the attention of Mother Catherine. Letters home became lifelines, but even these grew strange. Sister Mary Collins wrote to her brother in the seminary, her words careful but urgent. "Pray for us," she pleaded. "There is trouble here, though I cannot say more. Some of our sisters have been sent away, but I do not know where. I fear for them and for myself." The reply she received was brief, oddly formal, and unsigned. "Your concerns are noted. Trust in your superiors. Obedience is the path to salvation." The handwriting, she realized with a chill, was not her brother's. Other sisters tried to reach out as well. Sister Teresa Donovan sent a letter to her family in Illinois, asking if they had heard from Bernadette. The answer came weeks later, a single line. No word. "Are you well?" Teresa burned the letter in the kitchen stove, her hands shaking. She began to keep a journal, hidden beneath her mattress, recording every strange occurrence, every unexplained absence. "If I disappear," she wrote, "let this be my witness." Outside the convent, the community saw only what they were meant to see. The nuns' charity was praised in Sunday sermons, their discipline admired by local mothers. When Sister Margaret cured a farmer's son of pneumonia, the family sent a basket of apples in thanks. When the orphanage took in 2 new children, the villagers marveled at the sisters' generosity. No one asked about the missing faces, the empty places at the table. The church's word was law, and the convent's secrets were its own. But inside, terror grew. The sisters began to sleep with their rosaries clutched tight, their prayers tinged with desperation. They watched the doors at night, listening for footsteps in the hall. Some began to hide small tokens, letters, keepsakes, even scraps of food, in case they were taken suddenly, without warning. The older nuns tried to reassure the younger ones, but their own eyes betrayed their fear. One evening, as the sun set behind the chapel spire, Sister Claire O'Donnell found Sister Mary Collins weeping in the garden. "I can't do this anymore," Mary whispered, her voice raw. "Every day I wonder if I'll be next. I dream of Agnes and Bernardette calling for help, but I can't reach them." Claire knelt beside her, taking her hand. "We have to stay strong," she said, though her own voice trembled. "If we give in to fear, we're lost." The punishments grew harsher. Sister Josephine was caught speaking out of turn and was made to fast for a week. Sister Teresa was assigned to scrub the chapel floor on her hands and knees until her skin bled. The sisters began to avoid each other, afraid that even a whispered word might be overheard. The sense of community that had once sustained them was replaced by suspicion and isolation. And still, the disappearances continued. Sister Rebecca Murphy vanished one night, her bed empty, her belongings gone. Mother Catherine announced that she had been called to teach at a mission in the Dakota Territory. No one believed it, but no one dared to speak. The sisters began to mark the days by the losses, counting the empty beds and missing voices in the choir. The outside world remained oblivious. The villagers saw only the surface, the piety and the charity, the neat rows of vegetables and the well-tended graves. They did not see the fear in the sisters' eyes, the way they flinched at the sound of the bell, the way they clung to each other in the darkness. The church's authority was absolute, and the convent's secrets were safe at least for now. But inside, the terror was real. The sisters lived each day in dread, wondering who would be next, wondering if anyone would ever believe them if they spoke. The walls that had once promised safety now felt like a prison. The prayers that had once brought comfort now echoed with desperation. What would you do if your friend vanished and no one believed you? Would you risk everything to seek the truth? Or would you stay silent, hoping to survive another day? The Sisters of St. Mary's faced that choice every night as the shadows lengthened and the darkness pressed in. And as the pattern of disappearances continued, one thing became clear. Whatever was happening within those walls, Father Thomas Ryan arrived in Wisconsin with the hopeful zeal of a young priest eager to serve. He was not much older than the nuns at St. Mary's, his face still unlined by the burdens of authority, his faith as bright and untested as new snow. The church had sent him to shepherd a scattered flock of immigrants, to offer comfort and guidance in a land where the old certainties seemed to dissolve in the endless woods and shifting seasons. He took his duties seriously, visiting the sick, baptizing the newborn, and hearing confessions in a drafty wooden chapel that smelled of pine and candle wax. From the beginning, St. Mary's Convent was a puzzle to him. He admired the sisters' discipline, their tireless charity, the way they seemed to conjure order from chaos. Yet something about the place unsettled him. The nuns were always polite, always obedient, but their eyes rarely met his. Mother Catherine, in particular, was a formidable presence, her words measured, her gaze cool and appraising. She welcomed him with the proper deference, but he sensed a wall between them, a boundary he was not meant to cross. At first, he dismissed his unease as the product of inexperience. The church, after all, was built on hierarchy and obedience. The sisters had their rules, their cloistered lives, their mysteries. Who was he to question the ways of women who had given up everything for God? Yet as the months passed, the rumors began to reach him, whispers of nuns sent away without warning, of punishments that seemed excessive, of a sadness that clung to the convent like a fog. He tried to reassure himself. The frontier was hard, and the work was unrelenting. Perhaps the sisters were simply weary, their spirits worn thin by isolation and sacrifice. But the pattern was too persistent to ignore. Each time he visited, there seemed to be fewer faces at Mass, fewer voices in the choir. When he asked after the missing, Mother Catherine always had an answer: a transfer to a distant mission, a call to serve the poor in another state, a sudden illness that required rest elsewhere. The explanations were plausible, but they never quite satisfied. Father Ryan's faith was his anchor, but doubt began to gnaw at him. He found himself praying for guidance, asking God to show him the truth. Was it his place to interfere? Was he being tested, or was he failing in his duty to protect the vulnerable? The tension between obedience and conscience became a daily torment. The church demanded loyalty, but his heart demanded answers. One cold morning, as he prepared to leave after saying Mass at the convent, a small hand tugged at his sleeve. It was Jimmy Fletcher, the milkman's son, his face pale and serious. "Sister Mary asked me to give you this, Father," the boy whispered, pressing a folded scrap of paper into his palm. "She said it was important." Before Father Ryan could reply, Jimmy was gone, swallowed by the bustle of the kitchen. He waited until he was alone in his study to open the note. The handwriting was hurried, the words cramped and desperate. "Something evil happens at St. Mary's. Nuns disappearing, not sent away as claimed. I fear for my life. Please send help. Sister Mary Collins." The room seemed to tilt around him. He read the note again and again, his heart pounding. The words were stark, unadorned by the usual pieties. This was not a request for prayer or comfort. It was a cry for rescue. Father Ryan's world shifted in that moment. The doubts that had haunted him crystallized into certainty. He could no longer hide behind obedience or the comfort of routine. The church's rules, the demands of hierarchy, the fear of scandal, all seemed suddenly small in the face of Sister Mary's plea. He thought of the missing nuns, the empty beds, the haunted eyes of the sisters who remained. He thought of his own vows, the promise to serve not just the institution, but the souls entrusted to his care. Yet even as resolve hardened within him, fear crept in. To act against Mother Catherine was to risk everything: his position, his reputation, perhaps even his life. The church did not look kindly on those who questioned authority, especially in a place as fraught as the American frontier. But to do nothing was unthinkable. That night, Father Ryan knelt in prayer, the note clutched in his hands. He asked for courage, for wisdom, for the strength to do what was right. The silence that answered him was heavy, but in it he found a kind of clarity. Faith, he realized, was not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act in spite of it. The next morning, he set out for Milwaukee, the note hidden in his breast pocket, his mind racing with plans and fears. He would seek help. He would demand answers. He would not let Sister Mary's voice be lost in the darkness. The struggle between faith and doubt, obedience and conscience had ended. The time for action had come. Father Ryan returned to St. Mary's under the pretense of routine business, but every step he took across the convent's gravel drive felt weighted with purpose. The sky was low and gray, the air thick with the scent of rain and wood smoke. He carried the note from Sister Mary Collins close to his heart, its words burning in his mind. The sisters greeted him with their usual reserve, but he saw the fear in their eyes, the way they glanced at one another when they thought he wasn't looking. Mother Catherine was nowhere to be seen. He asked to see the financial records, citing a new diocesan policy. Sister Elizabeth, her smile brittle, led him to a cold, sparsely furnished parlor. "Mother Catherine is indisposed," she said, her hands twisting in her lap. "Sister Margaret is tending to a dying child in the infirmary. If you leave the forms, we'll see to them by week's end." Father Ryan insisted he would wait. He tried to project calm authority, but his nerves thrummed with anticipation. The hours dragged. He asked to tour the orphanage, then the infirmary. Everywhere he went, he counted faces, noted absences. The children looked thin and frightened, the orphans fewer than reported. The infirmary was nearly empty, its bed stripped, the air heavy with the sharp tang of medicinal herbs. Sister Margaret was nowhere to be found. He asked about the north wing, the area he had never been permitted to enter. "We have several cases of influenza there," Sister Elizabeth replied, her voice too quick. "It would be unwise for you to risk exposure." Her words were final, but her eyes flickered with something like fear. Father Ryan waited until the sisters were distracted, then slipped away down a side corridor. The convent's architecture was a maze of narrow halls and shadowed alcoves, the stone walls cold beneath his fingertips. He moved quietly, listening for footsteps, for the creak of old floorboards. The north wing was silent, the air colder, the light dimmer. He passed empty cells, their doors ajar, beds stripped bare. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant toll of the bell. At the end of the corridor, he found a heavy wooden door, its surface scarred and worn. An iron lock, newer than the rest, gleamed dully in the gloom. He pressed his ear to the wood. At first, nothing, then a faint sound, almost a whimper, followed by a low, desperate voice. "Is someone there? Please help us." The words were muffled, but unmistakably human. His heart hammered in his chest. He tried the handle, but it would not budge. He whispered through the keyhole, "Who's there?" A pause, then another voice, hoarse and trembling. "Father Ryan? Please don't leave us. They'll come back soon." He fumbled for something, anything to force the lock, but footsteps echoed behind him, sharp and purposeful. He turned to see Mother Catherine, flanked by Sister Margaret and a large, broad-shouldered man in workman's clothes. The man's face was set in a scowl, his arms crossed over his chest. "Father Ryan," Mother Catherine said, her voice icy. "This area is strictly cloistered. Your presence here is most inappropriate." She looked thinner than before, her habit hanging loosely, but her authority was undiminished. Sister Margaret's eyes were flat and cold. He tried to steady his voice. "I heard someone calling for help. Who is in that room?" Sister Margaret stepped forward, her tone smooth and practiced. "Some of our sisters are engaged in spiritual exercises. Mortification of the flesh, Father. Their cries can be misinterpreted by those unfamiliar with advanced devotional practices." The man Callahan, he would later learn, moved closer, his posture menacing. "This way, Father," he said, gripping Ryan's arm with unnecessary force. "Mother Catherine will send the reports to Milwaukee." As he was led away, Father Ryan caught one last glimpse of the locked door, the faint outline of desperate fingers pressed against the crack beneath it. The corridor seemed to close in around him, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and fear. He was escorted out of the convent, his mind racing. The voices, the locked door, the missing nuns. He could no longer doubt what he had feared. Something monstrous was happening within these walls, something the church itself seemed unwilling to confront. That night, as he rode back to town, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the memory of those pleading voices. He thought of the sisters trapped behind that door, of the terror in their words, of the cold certainty in Mother Catherine's eyes. He thought of the church's silence, the weight of obedience, the cost of conscience. Would you risk everything to open that door? Would you defy authority, break the rules, and face the darkness head-on? Or would you turn away, comforted by the illusion of safety, haunted forever by the knowledge of what you left behind? The choice, once theoretical, was now his to make, and the true horror of St. Mary's was only beginning to reveal itself. April 17, 1858. The day dawned with a deceptive gentleness, the sky washed clean by spring rain, the air fragrant with the promise of new life. But as the sun rose over the fields and the bell at St. Mary's tolled its first hollow note, a different kind of reckoning was already in motion. The church, at last, had sent its answer, not in the form of prayers or platitudes, but in the stern figure of Monsignor Patrick Kelly, dispatched from New York with the Archbishop's seal and a mandate for truth. He arrived unannounced, flanked by Father Ryan and 2 senior priests from neighboring parishes. Their carriage rolled through the convent gates, wheels crunching on gravel, the horse's breath steaming in the morning chill. The sisters, caught off guard, scattered like startled birds. Mother Catherine met them at the door, her composure fraying at the edges, her eyes darting from face to face as if searching for an escape. "Your visit is most irregular, Monsignor," she protested, her voice brittle. "We have protocols. Bishop Henny always sends word." Monsignor Kelly cut her off with a raised hand, his voice calm but unyielding. "The Archbishop instructed me to forego such notification. I have here a letter bearing his seal, authorizing a complete inspection of this institution, its records, and all its residents. I trust you will cooperate fully." A silence fell, heavy and expectant. Mother Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed she might refuse. But the authority of the Church was absolute, and she stepped aside, her face a mask of submission. The inspection began at once. The priests fanned out, questioning the sisters, examining the orphanage, the infirmary, the chapel. Father Ryan led Monsignor Kelly directly to the north wing, his heart pounding with dread and hope. The corridor was colder than he remembered, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something fouler fear, perhaps, or the memory of suffering. At the end of the hall, they found Sister Elizabeth standing guard before the locked door, her face pale and drawn. "Mother Catherine has forbidden entrance to this area," she said, her voice trembling. "We have sisters in spiritual retreat." Monsignor Kelly's reply was gentle but implacable. "Open the door, sister, or I shall be forced to consider you in violation of your vow obedience." For a moment, Sister Elizabeth wavered, her eyes flickering with terror. Then, with a shuddering breath, she stepped aside. The key was produced, the lock turned with a groan of protest, and the door swung open on rusted hinges. The stench hit them first, a suffocating blend of unwashed bodies, stale air, and human waste. The room beyond was small and windowless, its only light the thin beam that spilled in from the corridor. 5 women huddled inside, their habits filthy and torn, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. One, Sister Josephine, was heavily pregnant, her swollen belly a grotesque contrast to her skeletal frame. Another, Sister Rebecca, struggled to her feet, her eyes hollow but burning with a desperate hope. "Father Ryan," she croaked, her voice raw from disuse. "You came back. They were preparing us for the doctor, for the house in Chicago." Monsignor Kelly crossed himself, his face ashen. "What doctor? What house?" "Dr. Matthews," Sister Rebecca whispered, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He comes to examine us, to see which ones are suitable. The men pay more for nuns for brides of Christ. That's what Mother Catherine tells them." As the priests rushed to bring water and blankets, the other inspection teams made their own discoveries. In Sister Margaret's quarters, hidden behind a false panel in the infirmary, they found shelves lined with bottles, laudanum, chloroform, tinctures for rendering the unwilling compliant. A leather-bound journal lay open on the desk, its pages filled with clinical notes, names, dates, dosages, and chilling assessments of each nun's suitability. Some entries were coldly detached. Sister Agnes, delivered to Chicago, September 1855, $400. Others were more sinister. Sister Teresa, unsuitable for transfer, terminated November 1856. No commission. In the convent's office, the priests uncovered ledgers, coded with euphemisms, packages delivered, special commissions completed, each corresponding to a disappearance. The sums involved were staggering, far beyond what a humble convent could earn through charity or manual labor. Letters from brothel owners in Chicago and St. Louis detailed these special services provided: untouched nuns, pregnant sisters, orphan girls on the cusp of womanhood. The language was clinical, the transactions cold, but the horror was unmistakable. The truth, at last, was laid bare. Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret, and Sister Elizabeth were not merely cruel or misguided. They were impostors, predators who had infiltrated the church and turned its most sacred trust into a marketplace of suffering. The missing nuns had not been sent to distant missions or called to higher service. They had been sold, violated, murdered, their bodies buried in unmarked graves, or trafficked to brothels across the Midwest. The surviving sisters, once freed from their prison, told their stories in broken voices. They spoke of isolation, of punishments that escalated from fasting and silence to beatings and confinement. They described the nights when well-dressed men arrived at the convent, led by Mother Catherine to the locked room. They spoke of drugged tea, of waking to pain and shame, of pregnancies hidden and children taken away. Some had tried to resist, to fight or flee, but resistance was met with violence or worse. Sister Claire, her hands shaking, recounted the night Sister Teresa was killed. "They made us watch," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. They said it was a lesson in obedience. She prayed the rosary until the end. As the day wore on, the convent became a scene of controlled chaos. The rescued nuns were taken to safety. The grounds searched for evidence. In the vegetable garden, beneath the beans and herbs, the priests found shallow graves bones tangled in rotting habits, rosaries clutched in skeletal hands. Each discovery was a fresh wound, a new testament to the evil that had flourished in the shadow of faith. Mother Catherine was placed under ecclesiastical arrest, her face a mask of stone. Sister Margaret and the man called Callahan vanished before they could be apprehended, slipping away through secret passages known only to the original builders of the mansion. Sister Elizabeth, broken by what she had witnessed and done, collapsed into catatonia, her mind shattered by guilt and terror. As night fell, Monsignor Kelly stood in the ruined chapel, the stained glass dark and cold. He prayed for the souls of the lost, for the survivors, for the church itself. The horror revealed at St. Mary's was not the work of monsters, but of human beings trusted, respected, cloaked in the garments of holiness. The true nature of the operation was not just the trafficking of bodies, but the corruption of trust, the perversion of faith, the silencing of the innocent. The reckoning had come, but the wounds would not heal easily. The church would try to contain the scandal, to bury the truth along with the dead. But the memory of that day, the locked room, the ledgers, the broken women would linger in the minds of all who witnessed it. The darkness had been dragged into the light, but its shadow would stretch far beyond the walls of St. Mary's, haunting the land for generations to come. The days that followed the inspection at St. Mary's were a blur of shock, outrage, and frantic activity. News of the convent's horrors spread quickly through the diocese, though the church moved just as swiftly to contain the scandal. The official line was one of sorrow and resolve. A few wayward individuals had infiltrated the order, their crimes discovered and punished, the institution cleansed. But beneath the surface, the truth was far more tangled and far more disturbing. Mother Catherine was placed under ecclesiastical arrest, confined to her cell under the watch of 2 priests. She spoke little, her face a mask of cold defiance. When questioned, she offered only silence or cryptic remarks. "We serve a higher purpose than you can imagine," she told Monsignor Kelly, her voice flat. "You understand nothing of what you've uncovered." Within days, she vanished. The door to her cell was still locked from the inside, the window unbroken. Some whispered of secret passages, others of bribed guards. The truth was never found. Sister Margaret, too, disappeared last, seen slipping into the woods at dusk, her habit trailing in the mud. Only Sister Elizabeth remained, found kneeling in the chapel, her mind shattered, her lips moving in silent prayer to a God she no longer seemed to recognize. The man called Callahan was less fortunate. He was captured in Chicago 6 months later during a police raid on a brothel. Under questioning, he confirmed many details of the St. Mary's operation, but claimed ignorance of the women's whereabouts. They planned for this, he told the prison chaplain before his execution. Mother Catherine always said they had new identities waiting. They'd done it before, changed their skins like snakes. The church's response was swift and calculated. Bishop Henney, who had received multiple warnings about St. Mary's but failed to act, was quietly reassigned to a monastery in Europe. His personal letters, later unearthed by historians, revealed a man haunted by guilt. "The blood of those poor women cries out to heaven," he wrote. "I never questioned. God forgive me." The convent itself was deconsecrated and demolished, the land sold to erase the memory of what had happened there. For the survivors, the aftermath was a different kind of ordeal. The 12 nuns rescued from the locked room, and the convent's shadowed halls were dispersed to other religious houses, each required to sign a vow of silence. Some, like Sister Claire O'Donnell, struggled with nightmares and guilt, their trauma dismissed as hysteria by superiors who wanted only to move on. Sister Josephine Brady, who had given birth to a daughter 2 months after her rescue, was forbidden to keep the child. The infant was placed with a Catholic family in Pennsylvania, her origins erased. Josephine's grief was too much to bear. She died by suicide within a year, leaving behind a single line in her journal: "I cannot forgive. Not them, not the church, not myself." Sister Rebecca Murphy, who had spoken out during the inspection, left religious life altogether. Under the name Rachel Martin, she published a thinly veiled account of the events at St. Mary's, the Dark Convent, in 1865. The book was quickly suppressed, denounced as anti-Catholic propaganda. But surviving copies reveal a story that matches the official investigation in every detail. In her final chapter, she wrote, "What happened at St. Mary's was not the work of 3 evil women alone. It was enabled by a system that values silence over truth, reputation over justice. Until that changes, there will be other St. Mary's. The fate of the missing nuns remained a wound that would not heal. Of the 23 who vanished, only 9 were ever accounted for 4, found in shallow graves on the convent grounds. 5 rescued from brothels in Chicago and St. Louis during subsequent raids. The rest disappeared into the shadows, their names remembered only in a hidden list, their stories lost to time. Letters from desperate families went unanswered or returned with cold, official replies. "Your daughter has been called to higher service," one read. "Pray for her soul." Official documents, sealed for decades, tell a story of deliberate obfuscation. Financial ledgers were altered, correspondence destroyed, witnesses relocated or silenced. The church's priority was clear: protect the institution, no matter the cost. In a private letter to Rome, Archbishop Hughes wrote, "We have removed the immediate cause of scandal and provided for the care of the victims. However, I must express my concern that our system of oversight contains fundamental flaws that permitted such horror to continue unchecked for years." His recommendations were quietly filed away, never acted upon. Yet the truth could not be entirely buried. Local families whispered of the sad ladies in black who watched from the woods, of screams heard on still nights, of children who ran past the old convent grounds with their eyes averted. The Wisconsin Historical Society preserved a handful of water-damaged letters, a rosary, a list of names, fragments of a story too terrible to forget. The web had unraveled, but its strands lingered, sticky and invisible, binding the survivors to a past they could never escape. The church moved on, the land was built over, but the memory of St. Mary's remained a warning, a wound, a secret that refused to die. The story of St. Mary's did not end with the closing of its doors or the scattering of its survivors. Instead, it seeped into the soil, into the memories of families, into the very air of the Wisconsin countryside. The trauma endured by the nuns became a silent inheritance, passed down in whispers and nightmares, in the nervous glances of women who learned to distrust the promise of sanctuary. For decades, the Church's official silence was matched by the silence of the victims, each survivor carrying her own burden, each family left with questions that would never be answered. Some wounds never healed. Sister Claire O'Donnell, tormented by guilt for her role in restraining a friend during her murder, was transferred to a convent in Philadelphia. There, her cries in the night were met with discipline, not comfort. She eventually left religious life, vanishing from the records, her fate unknown. Sister Anne Sullivan, one of the rescued, quietly established support networks for other nuns who had suffered abuse. Her letters discovered long after her death, filled with a determination to prevent another St. Mary's, even as she clung to her faith. The ripple effect spread far beyond Wisconsin. The exposure of the convent's horrors led to a wave of inspections across the Midwest, uncovering smaller but similar abuses in other institutions. In Chicago, police raids freed women who had been trafficked under the guise of charity. In St. Louis, investigations were quickly suppressed, but rumors persisted. The pattern was always the same: initial outrage, a handful of arrests, and then a return to silence. The powerful protected their own, and the vulnerable were left to pick up the pieces. Yet the story refused to die. In 1912, workers renovating a mansion in Veracruz, Mexico, discovered the mummified remains of two elderly women alongside forged documents, American currency, and a locket bearing the image of St. Mary's. The bodies were identified as Mother Catherine and Sister Margaret, who had continued their crimes for decades before meeting their end in exile. Beneath the garden, authorities found the remains of at least a dozen young women, their identities lost to history. Even in the modern era, the legacy of St. Mary's lingers. In 2018, construction workers unearthed a small metal box near the former convent grounds. Inside were a rosary, a habit veil, and a handwritten list of names, 23 in total, with the simple inscription, "Remember Us." The box was quietly turned over to the diocesan archives, where it remains inaccessible to researchers. Local families still tell stories of strange sounds on autumn nights, of women's voices carried on the wind, of a sadness that clings to the land. Justice for most was never served. The Church's efforts to contain the scandal succeeded in erasing much of the official record, but not the pain, not the questions. The names of the missing are still spoken in some households, their stories pieced together from fragments and rumor. The true number of victims may never be known. The full truth, perhaps, was never meant to be revealed. Do you think the full truth was ever revealed? Or are there still secrets buried in the Wisconsin soil, waiting for someone brave enough to dig them up? Share your thoughts below. The legacy of St. Mary's is not just a story of horror, but a warning and reminder that silence can be as deadly as any crime, and that the past is never as far away as we think. What does it mean when evil hides behind a sacred mask? When the very institutions built to protect and uplift become the stage for suffering and betrayal? The story of St. Mary's forces us to confront uncomfortable truth, not just about the past, but about the nature of power, faith, and the human capacity for denial. Power, unchecked, breeds secrecy. In the shadow of authority, even the most devout can become complicit, choosing silence over confrontation, reputation over justice. The nuns of St. Mary's were not only victims of monstrous individuals, but of a system that prized obedience above all else. Their suffering was made possible by the reverence given to holy titles, by the reluctance to question those who claim to speak for God. Faith, for many, is a source of hope and meaning. But faith without vigilance can become a blindfold. The Church's rituals, its hierarchy, its aura of sanctity, all these can be used to inspire, but also to conceal. When trust is absolute, who dares to ask the forbidden questions? When the cost of doubt is exile or damnation, who will risk everything to speak the truth? And then there is silence, the silence of the victims, the silence of the witnesses, the silence of the powerful. Silence is not neutral. It is a choice, and sometimes it is the most dangerous choice of all. The story of St. Mary's is a warning. Evil does not always announce itself with violence or blasphemy. Sometimes it enters quietly, dressed in the robes of the righteous, speaking the language of salvation. How do we confront evil when it wears a holy mask? How do we balance faith with skepticism, loyalty with conscience? What would you do if you saw the signs? Would you speak, or would you turn away? These are not questions for history alone. They are questions for every community, every institution, every generation. Let's open this conversation together. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed power abused in a place meant for good? How do you think we can build systems that protect the vulnerable, even from those we trust most? The legacy of St. Mary's is not just a tale of horror, but a call to vigilance, a reminder that the sacred is only as strong as our willingness to defend it from the shadows within. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of St. Mary's. Stories like these are not easy to tell, nor are they easy to hear. But remembering the forgotten, speaking the names of those who suffered in silence, is how we honor their lives and ensure that history's darkest lessons are not lost to time. If this story moved you, if it made you question, reflect, or even shudder, I invite you to share it with someone who values truth as much as you do. The more we talk about these hidden chapters, the harder it becomes for them to be buried again. If you haven't already, subscribe and become part of our community of seekers, people who aren't afraid to look beneath the surface, to ask the hard questions, and to keep the memory of the lost alive. Your comments, your theories, your own stories of courage or doubt, they all help build a space where the past can be faced honestly, together. And remember, the story of St. Mary's is just one thread in a much larger tapestry of secrets, silence, and survival. If you think this was the darkest secret in American religious history, you haven't heard what happened in New Orleans. The next story will take us even deeper into the labyrinth, where faith and fear collide, and where the line between salvation and damnation is thinner than you ever imagined. Until then, keep questioning, keep remembering, and keep the light burning for those who are lost in the dark. I'll see you in the next chapter.